Beneath the calm shimmer of moonlit water lies a world that has never forgotten. The ocean, vast and ancient, carries memories far older than humankind. Whispers of empires drowned, of ships swallowed without a trace, and of something that moves beneath, older than fear itself. During the war, sailors told stories they weren't supposed to. Stories of sonar pings swallowed by silence, of waves that rose without wind, and of eyes the size of lifeboats staring up from the deep. Most called them legends, wartime delusions born from exhaustion. But a few refused to laugh, because they had seen what the reports never mentioned. They had heard the groan of something alive, something colossal, brushing the hull from below. Tonight we revisit those forbidden pages, to uncover the moment when myth met metal, and the ocean revealed the secret it never wanted us to remember. It was 1943, somewhere in the restless expanse of the South Pacific. The war had stretched into every horizon, and even the ocean seemed weary. The USS Archeron, a lean destroyer escort, cut through fog-thick waters, leading a small convoy of supply ships toward a point on no map worth naming. Orders were clear. No radio chatter, no lights after dusk. Just the endless rhythm of engines, the creak of steel, and the low hum of sonar pulsing into darkness. The men had grown used to silence. It was safer that way. But lately, that silence had taken on a strange weight. They called it the trench that eats sound, a stretch of ocean so deep that even sonar returned hollow. Pings came back distorted, as if the sea itself was swallowing the echoes. Some said it was just depth. Others whispered it was something moving. Archeron's captain, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, wasn't a man prone to superstition. He'd seen storms split ships in half, torpedoes miss by inches, and still believed that fear was a greater enemy than any unseen creature. Yet even he found himself lingering at the bridge window longer than usual, watching the fog roll in like a living thing. The night it began, the air was unnaturally still. No wind, no waves, just a wide, waiting calm. The sonar operator, a kid barely 20 named Reynolds, frowned at the screen. He adjusted dials, tapped the side. "Sir, I'm getting interference," he said, his voice careful, almost embarrassed. "Something's big, moving slow. 200 meters down." Hayes leaned over the console. "A whale?" he asked, but Reynolds shook his head. "Whales don't block signals like that. It's absorbing them." Outside, the sea glowed faintly under the pale wash of the moon. Nothing moved, not a ripple, not a current. Then came the sound, a low, resonant vibration, like a freight train passing underwater. Metal shuddered. Cups rattled in the mess hall. Every man froze. "Depth charge?" someone whispered. But there had been no explosion, no flash, only that deep, body-shaking hum that seemed to come from beneath their feet. Hayes ordered all lights killed. The convoy followed, dark shapes slipping into the fog. Hours dragged like days. The crew waited for something. A torpedo, a mine, an attack that never came. Then, near dawn, sonar pinged again. This time it returned but warped, echoing in patterns that made no sense, as though several smaller signals were bouncing off something enormous and irregular. The fog thickened until even the Archeron's own deck lights dissolved into mist. A lookout shouted. He'd seen a shape break the surface 50 yards off the port bow. Hayes lifted his binoculars, but there was nothing now, just ripples spreading outward, concentric and wide. Then the engines on one of the supply ships stuttered. Over the radio came static, a single unfinished phrase, "It's beneath," and then silence. Hayes turned to his officers. "A hold formation," he ordered. though his voice betrayed the tremor in his chest. The sonar lit up again, not a blip this time, but a wall of interference sweeping under the convoy. The Archeron shook violently. Tools crashed to the floor. The crew clung to rails as the sea bulged, lifting the destroyer several feet before dropping it again with a violent slap. And then, nothing. The noise, the movement, even the interference, is gone. Just the return of the endless hollow ping of sonar fading into static. The convoy drifted in uneasy quiet, the morning sun finally pushing through the fog like a reluctant witness. Hayes scanned the horizon. Every ship was still in formation. Every ship except one. Mercer was gone. No smoke, no wreckage, no distress call. Just a thin slick of oil and a few crates bobbing where it had been minutes before. The captain didn't speak. No one did. They all felt it. The heavy presence of something unseen lurking just below. It wasn't the enemy they'd been trained to fight. It wasn't even human. And as the sea began to close over the last trace of the missing vessel, one thought echoed through the crew's minds, unspoken yet shared. Whatever was beneath them was still there. Night fell like a curtain drawn too quickly. The convoy drifted in uneasy silence, fog trailing their wakes like ghosts that refused to disperse. On board the USS Mercer, sailors spoke in whispers, if at all. They'd felt the earlier tremors under their boots, the strange hum that had rolled through the water like a living pulse. No one said it aloud, but the ocean felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, as if something vast below was holding its breath. At 02:17 hours, the Mercer's log stopped recording. The last entry noted calm seas and minor interference on sonar. The next thing survivors would later recall was a violent jolt. Not an impact, but a surge from beneath, as if the ship had been lifted by an invisible wave. Lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Generators failed. The deck plunged into total darkness. Several men claimed to have heard it first. A deep metallic groan, followed by the screech of tearing steel. One sailor, Seaman Alden, described it as the sound of the ship's own bones breaking. Another swore he saw the deck bulge upward near the bow before splitting apart. Yet no explosion followed, no flash of fire or falling debris, only the sickening sound of metal giving way. Then the roar of water flooding in. In the command room, officers shouted over alarms that didn't make sense. Depth charges hadn't detonated. No sonar contact had been confirmed. The sea itself had turned hostile. That was the only explanation that seemed to fit. Survivors later said they felt a slow tilt, then a sudden drop, as if the vessel had been pulled downward by something immense and deliberate. Fragments from the official naval transcript, declassified decades later, paint a chilling picture. One radio operator's words were partially redacted, but readable enough. Something's moving beneath. It's not a sub. Too big, the hulls. Lifting, then static. Nothing more. Minutes later, the Mercer vanished from radar entirely. Nearby ships reported only faint interference where the signal had been. The Archeron's captain, Hayes, ordered spotlights aimed toward the last known coordinates. Beams of light pierced the mist, revealing nothing but heaving water and streaks of oil sliding across the surface like spilled ink. When dawn broke, the sea looked eerily undisturbed, as if it had erased the event overnight. A few crates floated near the perimeter, cracked open and empty. No bodies, no life rafts, not even the echo of distress calls. The ocean had consumed every trace. In the official inquiry, explanations came fast and hollow. An undersea mine, A structural failure, maybe a munitions accident. Yet every crewman from the convoy who'd witnessed it remembered something else. A pulse felt through the hull, a shadow too vast to define, and a silence afterward that seemed alive. One statement, removed from later transcripts, came from an engineer who refused to serve again. He wrote, "It wasn't sinking. It was taken. The water rose beneath us, not from above, but from below, like the ocean itself was breathing, and we were caught in its exhale." That sentence was later redacted in full, classified as psychological distortion. But even decades later, among veterans who dared speak about that night, the phrase persisted, "In shush, the sea lifted us." As the surviving ships drifted through the fog, searching for wreckage that didn't exist, Hayes kept his binoculars fixed on the horizon. He said nothing, but the look in his eyes told the crew everything. Whatever had taken the Mercer was still close, still watching, waiting for the next moment to rise. The ocean had made its move, and the hunters of the deep had just begun to stir. The day after the Mercer vanished, the ocean around the Archeron seemed to hold its breath. The men barely spoke. They performed their duties in silence, glancing at the water as if it were a thing alive. Even the radio operators whispered. Every creak of the ship, every soft thud of the waves against steel felt amplified, like the sea was listening. Captain Hayes refused to let fear dictate his command. He ordered double sonar sweeps, tighter formation, and full engine power. "There's a logical explanation," he told his officers. "Submarine activity, maybe a depth collapse." But the men had seen the oil slick. They'd heard the sound. Logic was small comfort in a place where entire ships could vanish without a ripple. By late afternoon, sonar began to misbehave again. Short bursts of static, faint beeps appearing and vanishing mid-sweep. Reynolds, the operator, frowned at the screen. "Contact, bearing 185, depth 300 meters, moving fast." "How fast?" Hayes asked. Reynolds hesitated. Faster than anything down there should." The ping returned, this time from behind them, then to the port side, then beneath. It was circling. Hayes leaned in close, his jaw tightening. "A submarine can't move like that," he muttered. "Not at that depth." The ship's medic, a man with a scientist's calm, suggested thermal anomalies, warm currents causing false readings. But the chief engineer shook his head. Warm currents don't knock out sonar entirely. The atmosphere shifted. Men gripped railings a little tighter. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. It wasn't just data anymore. It was presence. The Archeron was being watched. At sunset, the sea turned to liquid metal, reflecting blood-orange light across the deck. For a moment, the crew let themselves breathe. Then Reynolds spoke again, his voice tight. "It's back, right under us. Big return." The hull vibrated. A deep, resonant hum, not from the engines but from below. It grew louder, pulsing through the ship's spine like a heartbeat. Cups rattled, bolts trembled, and something deep within the structure groaned in protest. "Engines are half," Hayes barked. But even as the order left his lips, the vibration turned violent. A low boom echoed from beneath. The deck tilted slightly to starboard. Water splashed over the bow. "Depth charge," someone yelled. "No!" Hayes shouted back. "Hold your fire." He knew this wasn't an enemy that could be scared away with explosives. This was something else entirely. Reynolds' monitor went black, then flared white. The sonar had shorted. Just before it died, a final image flashed across the screen. A mass the size of the Archeron, rising from the depths at impossible speed. A lookout screamed from the upper deck. Hayes ran to the bridge window just in time to see the water swelling upward, not from waves, but from something enormous pushing through. For one terrible moment, the shape beneath the surface was visible, dark and immense, longer than any submarine he had ever seen. The sea bulged, lifted, then collapsed in on itself, drenching the deck in foam and spray. The destroyer heaved like a toy boat in a storm. Men fell, tools scattered, and the lights flickered violently. A metallic screech tore through the hull, as if claws or something worse had dragged along its underside. The smell of ozone filled the air. "Get us out of here!" Hayes roared. The engines screamed, propellers churning water that suddenly felt thick, resistant, almost alive. As the ship lurched forward, the hum beneath them faded, replaced by a single heavy thud that echoed through the hull like a parting blow. Then, stillness. The water settled. The sonar was dead. The Archeron drifted, engines sputtering, surrounded by the echo of its own terror. No one spoke. They all stared at the dark sea, waiting for it to move again. But it didn't. Not yet. Some swore, years later, that in that final moment before dawn, they saw it, a shape, vast and shadowed, gliding just beneath the surface, the size of a destroyer, silent, watching, waiting. The ocean had struck back, and it wasn't done. When the war ended, the oceans grew quiet again, or so the reports claimed. Ships returned home, medals were given, and the sea's darker secrets were folded neatly into classified files stamped Confidential, Pacific Command. Among them lay the incident logs of the USS Archeron and the missing Mercer, rebranded under a single, harmless phrase, subsurface minefield incident. To the public, it was an accident, nothing more. A tragic mishap in dangerous waters, the kind of thing that happened often during wartime. But for those who had been there, the survivors who'd watched the ocean rise against them, that explanation felt hollow. Many refused interviews. Some never spoke of it again. Others simply disappeared into quiet retirement, carrying with them the weight of something they couldn't explain and were forbidden to name. Decades later, long after the names of those ships had faded from memory, a freelance journalist named Daniel Harker stumbled across a brief mention in a declassified naval index. The entry was small, barely 2 lines long. Incident 12B, hence South Pacific Convoy Anomaly. See supplemental logs, Archeron, restricted. Curiosity became an obsession. Harker had covered missing aircraft, Cold War experiments, even unverified deep-sea transmissions. But something about this convoy anomaly gnawed at him. It wasn't the lack of data that intrigued him. It was the precision of what had been removed. Over the next year, Harker filed FOIA requests, contacted naval historians, and tracked down aging veterans. Most declined to speak. A few agreed off the record. What he heard unsettled him more than he expected. One man, a retired sonar technician, described strange readings in that region of the Pacific, Sioux. Vast moving signatures with no heat trace, no propulsion, and no classification code. It wasn't mechanical, the man said. It was alive, or something trying to be. In the archives, Harker noticed a peculiar pattern. Archeron's daily logbook ended abruptly 2 days before the incident. A supplemental log existed but had been sealed. When he requested access, the Navy denied it, citing national security and biological research confidentiality. biological. The word lingered in his mind like an echo. Digging deeper, he found fragments of post-war research correspondence between a naval oceanographer and an admiral overseeing classified recovery operations. Most of the letters were redacted, whole pages blacked out, but one line survived, almost mocking in its simplicity. Recovered fragments unidentifiable. Metallic cartilage hybrid. Recommend deep containment. Harker's first article draft never saw print. His editor called it too speculative. He was told to focus on human interest stories instead. But Harker couldn't let it go. Every night he replayed the veterans' voices, the words metallic cartilage, the missing pages, the convenient minefield explanation. In his notes, he drew a timeline. The Mercer vanished in 43. The Archeron crippled the next night. The files sealed by 45. Then a decade of silence, until 1953. A year that surfaced again and again in his research, marked by references to anomaly expeditions and acoustic containment drills. Something had happened then, something that forced the Navy back to the same stretch of ocean they'd once sworn never to speak of. As Harker traced those breadcrumbs, he began receiving anonymous envelopes. Photographs of sonar readings, partial coordinates, and a typed note with no return address. It wasn't a minefield. It moved. He stared at the note for hours. Outside, the rain tapped the window like a Morse code message he couldn't quite decipher. He knew then that whatever had devoured those ships hadn't been a wartime myth. It had a history, a pattern. And according to the coordinates he'd just uncovered, it had surfaced again, 10 years later, in almost the exact same place. The silence hadn't been the end of the story. It was only the beginning of the cover-up. Officially, there was no record of any naval operation in the South Pacific Trench that year. The archives list only routine oceanographic survey, 1953. But Harker's investigation revealed something else. Coded memorandums, unsigned telegrams, and a series of procurement orders for deep-sea cameras rated for depths no civilian expedition could survive. The mission had a name once, though it was later erased. Among the few remaining fragments, one phrase appeared again and again. Marine Megafauna Anomaly Study. In January 1953, the USS Calypso Bay departed from an unmarked port in Guam under heavy secrecy. No manifest, no press mention, and no returning crew photographs. The men on board weren't sailors in the usual sense. They were oceanographers, engineers, and classified observers. Their assignment, to investigate a sonar disturbance identical to the one that preceded the disappearance of the Mercer. They were told it was research, but the orders carried an undercurrent of fear. A sense that this was more containment than curiosity. For weeks, the expedition transmitted dry scientific logs. Salinity, pressure, currents, all routine. The tone was calm, clinical. Then, on February 9th, the tone changed. One telegram read simply, "Unidentified biological mass detected. Approx 200 FT length. Responsive movement. The next day, contact confirmed. Recording underway. Requesting immediate advisory on engagement protocol." And then, nothing. The following transmissions were partially erased, overwritten by unrelated coordinates and signatures. Yet one survived, badly degraded, time-stamped just before midnight. Visual confirmed. Not a whale. God help us. Harker's search led him to a retired naval archivist who still remembered the Calypso Bay file before it vanished from circulation. "We had film reels," the man said. 6 of them. Black and white, silent. They were labeled deep anomaly footage. I only saw seconds before they took it away." "What did you see?" Harker asked. The archivist hesitated, eyes unfocused, as if replaying a memory that hurt to recall. "The water wasn't dark, it was moving, like light bending around something huge. Then there was a shadow, slow and deliberate, passing in front of the sub-camera. You could tell it was flesh. You could feel it in a recovered lab report, buried in a batch of unrelated materials. Harker found references to tissue samples exhibiting structural metallization and acoustic dissonance during retrieval. The words were technical, detached, but the undertone was panic disguised as precision. The scientists had no language for what they'd found. By March, the Calypso Bay was officially listed as returned to base, no notable findings. Yet none of the listed crew ever signed out. Their families received vague letters stamped by the Department of Naval Research. In Shishe, condolences for service-related accidents during routine operations. A single film reel surfaced years later in private hands. It was heavily water-damaged, grainy beyond recognition. Still, experts noted frames showing something vast moving behind plumes of sediment. A blurred outline, almost serpentine, but thicker, heavier. Analysts dismissed it as camera malfunction. Those who viewed it privately disagreed. One reportedly claimed, "It looked back." Harker tried to acquire the reel. Days later, it was confiscated in an alleged customs seizure. The man who sold it was found dead 2 weeks after feature. Drowning in his bathtub, despite no sign of forced entry. The 1953 expedition became one of those historical gaps no one could fill. Every lead folded back into silence. The Navy maintained that nothing unusual occurred, that the mission's existence was misinterpreted. But somewhere in the unmarked corners of government storage, reels of film and sonar records remain, sealed under layers of bureaucracy. Proof of something colossal, something filmed and buried. And among the few who lived long enough to speak about it, one name reappeared, Jay, a diver who had been there, who saw what the cameras could never capture, and who spent the rest of his life haunted by the sight. I wasn't supposed to be there. That's the first thing you need to understand. By the time I dove to that depth, in '74, the Navy had already marked the area as unfit for civilian exploration. They said the pressure down there warped sonar, scrambled instruments, and that it was too unstable for safe diving. But to me, that was an invitation. I'd heard rumors of wrecks that never made the reports, one of them matching the Calypso Bay. The pay was good, and I was still young enough to think the ocean was conquerable. At first, everything felt ordinary. The descent, the static in my headset, the faint hiss of oxygen. The trench walls appeared like black marble cliffs, falling away into infinity. My sonar gave weak readings, scattered reflections, but one echo kept returning, deeper than my scope could trace. It pulsed, not like a machine, like a heartbeat. I told myself it was nothing. A glitch, maybe an undercurrent. But then the lights hit something impossible. Twisted metal, half buried in silt, the remains of a ship. Not the Calypso Bay, not any vessel I recognized. The steel looked melted, edges curved as though pressed inward by tremendous force. And there, embedded in the hull, was a fragment, white, ridged, and sharper than bone. I took it. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe arrogance. The moment I touched it, the sound changed. My sonar, which had been quiet for nearly half an hour, began to roar. A low-frequency vibration that shook through the water and into my ribs. My gauge needles twitched violently. Something large moved beyond the silt cloud. You've never known true smallness until you've seen a shadow that blots out light from below. I couldn't see it clearly, just mass and motion. My brain refused to make sense of the scale. I remember the instinct, that primal certainty that I wasn't the predator anymore. I was prey surface control demanded I ascend immediately. I didn't respond. I was staring at the sonar, watching the interference spiral across the display like a living storm. The sound grew deeper, resonant, like metal groaning underwater. And then, for one fraction of a second, it stopped. Complete silence. When I looked back at the wreck, the fragment I'd taken was gone. They found me unconscious, drifting above the trench, my suit pressure near failure. I don't remember surfacing. The debrief was short. They said nitrogen narcosis, hallucination, overexertion. But when I emptied my gear bag, I found something the medics didn't see. A piece of that hull plating, streaked with what looked like teeth marks. Each groove was wider than my hand. I sent samples to a marine lab under a fake name. A month later, I got a call from a voice I didn't recognize. "Do not contact us again," they said. "Destroy what you found." When I called back, the number was disconnected. For years, I tried to convince myself I imagined it. As I got older, I stopped diving. But sometimes when I turn on the TV late at night, and they show sonar scans of the Pacific floor, I still see it. That pattern, that pulse, hidden between the data lines. The nightmares started last year. I'm back in the suit, drifting downward, the light fading, my radio filling with static. Then comes the sound, the same one I heard in the trench. A deep, rolling growl that isn't quite animal and isn't quite mechanical. I always wake up just before I see it again. Maybe it never left that place. Or maybe it followed me home into memory, into dreams. Either way, I know what I saw. And if you ever hear sonar roar like thunder beneath your feet, don't look for where it's coming from. Because by the time you do, it's already found you. It began, like so many modern mysteries do, with a video no one could explain. Late one night, an anonymous upload appeared on a small maritime history channel, a grainy black and white reel titled simply Recovered Expedition Film. 1953, no description, no credits, just a single line in the bio, for those who still remember what was buried. The footage opened with static, then a shaky underwater view. The image wavered, flickering between black and grey, as if the ocean itself were resisting being filmed. Then the scene steadied, revealing the twisted hull of a ship. Its steel plating was warped inward, edges bowed like paper crushed in a fist. Along the side, faint markings spelled out Sea Bay. Viewers froze the frame, enhanced it, and confirmed the impossible. Calypso Bay, the ship that officially never existed. The next minute of the film was chaos. The camera turned, catching brief flashes of what appeared to be enormous indentations, semicircular, patterned like teeth. Each mark spanned nearly a meter. Something had bitten into the ship. The water shook faintly in rhythmic pulses. And then, from the edge of the screen, a blurred form passed, too fast to identify, but large enough to darken the entire frame for several seconds. The uploader said nothing else. Comments flooded in within hours. Some claimed it was a hoax, clever compositing, deepfake overlays using authentic 16mm textures. Others swore the footage was real, pointing to oxidation patterns on the hull and the authentic war-era lens distortion. The video racked up 2 million views in its first day. Then without warning, it vanished, deleted, channel gone. account scrubbed, but by then, mirrors had already appeared on Reddit, maritime archives, and even private Discord servers dedicated to lost oceanic evidence. Those who analysed the file noted strange anomalies. Background audio beneath the static low-frequency rumbles that, when isolated, resembled sonar pulses. Each pulse matched historical readings from 1943, the same readings recorded before the Mercer vanished. Oceanographic institutions scrambled to comment. The Smithsonian denied involvement. The Naval Research Office called it digitally fabricated conspiracy media. Yet quietly, emails circulated between university departments asking for access to the original upload's metadata. Someone wanted to trace where it came from. Then came the leak. A supposed data engineer from a classified government contractor posted a brief statement. Checksum confirmed. The file originated from the Department of Naval Records Archive digitization batch. Contained encrypted headers. This wasn't created, it was restored. Within 24 hours, his account disappeared. Experts began to panic, not publicly, but in closed circles. Marine biologists noted that the supposed bite marks on the hull didn't match any known species, modern or extinct. The curvature suggested a jaw width exceeding 60 feet. Some whispered it could be an exaggerated artifact. Others privately admitted it wasn't impossible. One scientist wrote anonymously in a forum later deleted, "The ocean doesn't fossilize everything it kills." Theories exploded. Some linked it to early nuclear tests mutating deep-sea fauna. Others claimed the footage was disinformation, part of a psychological experiment. But beneath the noise, a subtler pattern emerged. Enthusiasts began comparing sonar data from modern naval missions in the same region, and what they found was chilling. The signal distortion that once haunted Archeron's sonar, the oscillating interference once dismissed as error, had begun reappearing in recent oceanographic surveys. The same rhythm, the same intervals, only stronger. One anonymous sonar operator posted, "We thought it was malfunctioning. Then it moved." As digital sleuths argued, and the scientific community grew uncharacteristically quiet, a sense of unease spread online. The deeper people looked, the less they found, as if the internet itself was swallowing traces of the truth. The upload had lasted less than 48 hours, yet those who watched it said they'd never forget the final frame before the video cut to Blackadder, the faint outline of a massive, tapering fin drifting past the wreckage, and beneath it a flicker of motion, as if something had turned to look directly into the lens. The footage was gone, but the pattern had returned. It began subtly, a familiar flicker in the sonar data of deep-sea research vessels. At first, no one noticed. To oceanographers, such glitches were routine: thermal interference, sediment drift, the quiet noise of an ever-shifting planet. But somewhere in the Pacific Archives, a technician noticed a strange rhythm. The pulse wasn't random. It was repeating. Every 73 seconds, the signal echoed across decades, appearing in the same coordinates once occupied by the Mercer, the Archeron, and the vanished Calypso Bay. Modern sonar was far more advanced, and yet, when plotted on a spectrogram, the signature was nearly identical to the readings from 1943, only this time stronger. When Daniel Harker published his findings online, no one believed him. The scientific journals ignored his submission, reviewers calling it anomalous noise misinterpreted through confirmation bias. But amateur analysts, divers, sonar techs, and late-night theorists Deaton began comparing notes. From Chilean fishing trawlers to Japanese research buoys, identical readings surfaced. Something deep was moving again. At a press conference in 2012, a NOAA representative laughed when asked about biological anomalies at trench depth. He smiled politely and said, "The ocean is vast, but it's not hiding prehistoric monsters." The clip went viral, but in the weeks that followed, 3 naval survey missions in that same trench returned incomplete data. One vessel reported malfunctioning instruments, another logged a pressure spike without seismic cause. The third refused to comment altogether. Online forums called it the Pulse Reawakening. Reddit threads filled with grainy graphs, timestamp overlays, and the phrase, "The sea remembers." Harker, now in his 60s, gave a final interview to a small podcast. His voice trembled not from fear but fatigue. "You can't bury the truth in salt water," he said. "It comes back up eventually, like a body." He claimed to have received recent sonar records from an anonymous source inside the US Navy. They showed enormous acoustic distortions, spanning hundreds of meters, rising from trench level to within striking distance of surface depth, then disappearing again, as if something had ascended and slipped back into silence. Mainstream scientists dismissed it all. They pointed to ice quakes, methane plumes, even deep-sea landslides. Rational explanations. Plausible, safe. But deep down, some of them began to wonder. Extinction is a word humans invented. A word of comfort, implying we've seen everything there is to see. But the ocean has never promised us that. Satellite imagery occasionally revealed odd disturbances. Circular ripples miles wide, concentric rings expanding in perfectly calm weather. Once, a cluster of buoys vanished overnight. Another time, a drone sub's camera feed cut out mid-recording, replaced by a single frame of white static. A blur too fast to capture, yet large enough to register as motion across the entire screen. Marine institutes blamed equipment failure. Internet theorists called it proof. The two worlds collided briefly, science and speculation, before retreating back into their corners. Still, the data remained, too consistent to ignore. By 2020, oceanic mapping satellites logged pressure anomalies across the Pacific Rim. The pattern formed a slow, sweeping arc toward as if something massive was migrating, following a route older than memory, a creature that learned silence long before humans learned speech. The narrator's tone softens now, calm but heavy, like someone standing at the edge of a secret too big to name. Maybe the Megalodon was never the point. Maybe it was only a symbol, a reminder that nature doesn't erase her giants. She hides them. She waits. And perhaps what humanity feared most wasn't the monster itself, but the truth that something vast still moves beneath us, indifferent to our technology, our theories, and our fragile sense of control. Extinction is comfort. Silence is survival. And somewhere, deep under the black water, the pattern continues to pulse, slow, steady, patient, waiting for us to listen again. The ocean has no archives, no tombstones, no headlines. It buries its truths beneath pressure and time, keeping what it wishes and erasing what it doesn't. To human eyes, it's just water, infinite, indifferent, blue. But beneath that stillness lies memory. Every sound ever made, every ship ever lost, every scream swallowed by salt and silence. The sea remembers them all. We've mapped the stars better than we've mapped our own depths. With satellites, sonar, and sensors, we claim to know the planet. Yet the ocean humbles us. It watches our probes descend and lets most of them return, but not all. It gives glimpses, oil slicks, broken hulls, signals that shouldn't exist, and then closes over them like a hand. It's as if it allows us to know only what it wants us to believe. Maybe the stories were never about monsters. Maybe they were warnings, echoes of something ancient that refuses to die. We call it legend because it's easier than admitting we've never really been alone. And when sailors whisper about shadows beneath the waves, maybe they aren't recalling nightmares. Maybe they're remembering something the ocean whispered first. Every few years, a sonar ping still returns distorted. A pressure spike still ripples through deep-sea readings. Analysts shrug, say it's the current, say it's nothing. But sometimes, just before the data cuts out, there's a low frequency, almost like a heartbeat. The divers, the captains, the scientists, they all fade, one generation at a time. Yet the trench remains, still, waiting, and maybe one night, when the sea is glass and the world is asleep, something will rise again, just far enough to break the surface, just long enough to remember. Because the ocean doesn't forget. It forgives nothing, explains nothing, and never sleeps. It listens, and sometimes when the water is quiet enough, you can almost hear it breathing.